honored to have with us tonight two local writers who have national and even international recognition. Greg Sarris and Jonah Raskin both write fiction and nonfiction. Their works are appreciated and often treasured in part because they write about Sonoma County. They write about Sonoma people, places, history, and cultures. They are preserves of the past. They have also added in their writings to our rich body of lore and legend. For the first part of tonight's program, Greg and Jonah will be in conversation with one another. 20 plus years of knowing each other, so it'll be fun to relive some of that with you. Afterwards, we'll take questions from members of the audience. We hope that you will come away from this event with a clearer sense than when you arrived at what it means to have a sense of place. So here we go, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa. Greg, thank you for being here.
Happy to be here. I really like this situation because I didn't have to prepare anything. You had to prepare all the questions, so I could just sit here and answer.
Yes.
Great thing.
So in looking at it, the audience here reminds me that you've often said to me, oh, Sonoma County is a multicultural place. It's not just all white people. Some white people think it's only white people, but they only go to white people places.
Hold on 1 second.
Yes.
I think people in the back are having a hard time hearing. Can everybody hear in the back?
Harder to hear you.
Louder, huh?
I know, I have the big voice.
Okay.
Big mouth, rather.
Okay, so I'm acknowledging that there's a real cultural diversity.
Just straight like this.
Like this?
No, like this.
Like this, oh, okay. Okay, I'm acknowledging the fact that there's real cultural diversity in this audience, and
Okay, there.
that it kind of,
There we go.
it in some ways it probably reflects the true demographics in Sonoma County. And you've reminded me that some white people here think this is only a all white people county, which is not true.
Well, I think a lot of us have been reminding Sonoma County that it's not an all-white county for quite some time.
Yeah.
So and I've always written about another history. When I wrote and published Grand Avenue, and of course got a lot of attention for that, I know that some columnists, writers around here were very concerned, and people were very concerned because they thought that all of a sudden all of the United States and the world, the book got published around the world, was that people would think of Santa Rosa as a town of quote-unquote prune pickers. Well, it is more than just McDonald Avenue, and always has been.
So one thing that I liked about your stories in Grand Avenue is that you use place names that people here would know, like Santa Rosa and Grayton and Sebastopol, and you clearly weren't worried that people who read the book in Bulgaria or France wouldn't know what the heck Sebastopol or Santa Rosa was.
Yes, that's partly correct about my concern. I actually grew up on Presley Street in South Park.
Yes.
But Presley Street, people in Europe and other places would think Elvis Presley or something. But Grand Avenue went along with the theme of that book, that even us American Indian people here, we've become in many ways much like the people who came here, homeless now, but homeless in our own homeland. And that Grand Avenue that we're on, that grand, crazy, wild train of a history, of Western history that we got caught into.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah.
So, I was reading something recently about the roundhouse, the Miwok roundhouse, which some Anglo people wanted to restore, and this Native American Indian person came forward and said, well, did you consult any Indians or Miwok people about the roundhouse and reconstruction? And the Anglo people said, oh, there are no Indians around here, they're all extinct.
Like,
So I think that's a all too often comment that people have made in this country for a long time.
Yeah, well, again, I jokingly like to say that until there were casinos, nobody thought there were Indians here. And then of course they thought, where did these Indians come from? But you know, it's so easy, particularly in communities where, because of socioeconomic reasons and others, and racism, we're separated from one another. We don't see one another here. But there's always been Indians and other people here for forever. It's just that nobody has contact. The other thing about American Indians is that people have tended to like to see us as something in the past, not here. You know, we're the prick in the American conscience, Jonah. People can say, well, slavery was bad, but, you know, we got rid of it. Of course, never mind the legacy of slavery. And then they can say, well, the immigrants came here, but they chose to come here. Never mind the conditions under which they have to come here. But how are you going to deal with genocide, unprecedented genocide in the modern world, to talk about the place where you live and how you were able to live here because of that genocide? It's something we don't want to, Americans really don't want to think about. It's easy to think of us in the past.
Yes, I hear you. Well, the genocide thing, you know, sometimes I've said to myself, reading American literature and American history, you would have thought that as the people who called themselves pioneers and settlers moved from New England across the country to here, they would have sort of learned, but they repeated many of the same things that they did back in Massachusetts in the 17th century, you know, when they got here.
Yeah, the question, freedom and democracy for whom? Always for those in power. And, you know, the question continues to be a question of power and hierarchy. And, you know, the women and people of color have had a history where they're increasingly marginalized, and women didn't have the vote, others didn't have the vote. So the early rancheros did the same thing. Interestingly enough, Vallejo and his folks who came to California were mestizos, many of them having African American blood in them, but at the minute they come here, they replicate that feudal society and enslave Indians and do the same thing. So it's a pattern. Like, how do we break this pattern? And that's the real question today. One thing I'm doing, and I just have to tout, and I'm really proud of it, I'm on the board of the Museum of the American Indian for the Smithsonian. And along with that board, and along with working with Governor Newsom, I'm creating a new curriculum for the public schools that will be instituted in the public schools. The days are long past when you build in fourth grade a mission with, isn't it ironic, sugar cubes.
Right, sugar was responsible for enslaving an awful lot of people in the slave trade. So when I wanted to do this conversation with you, the notion of talking about place, in a sense of place, like came to me pretty quickly. I think that I first got a sense of place by reading D.H. Lawrence's Studies in Classic American Literature. Because American writers became very early on and throughout our history that this place was different than what they called the old world. And so they wanted to, I believe, from James Fenimore Cooper to Faulkner and beyond, that wanted to explore what it meant to be in this specific place that was very different and very unique.
Yeah, well, and again, James Fenimore Cooper writing for or representing American Indians, and Faulkner, in a sense, representing African Americans, things change when the native gets the pen. Those with the pen tell the story. So those things change. I kind of had to laugh, though. I remember reading D.H. Lawrence as an undergraduate in college, and I read him basically for sex.
Of course.
I mean, I didn't. Remember? Some of you are old enough.
Yes. Right. Yeah. Lady Chatterley's lover. Yes. Right. Exactly.
Women in love. Come on.
You know, there was a time when you had to go to Paris to get the book, like in Henry Miller.
Yeah, Henry Miller too.
The Puritanism has traveled from England to New England and spread out all over the country.
But let's talk about place, Jonah. Let's talk about this place, because
Yeah.
I think increasingly, as people now, and we're all in this together with climate disaster, nothing's more important than us becoming acquainted with a place, and so well that we feel responsible for it, responsible locally. So we must restory the landscape, and this landscape is full of stories, from the indigenous people here through all the immigrant people that have come here. They're here now, and more than ever, we have to learn from all those stories to create narratives that'll bring us forward if we're going to survive. And I think it's so important now that we start telling these stories, and again, taking responsibility in whatever way we can to create a sustainable future with the land and with the people, all the people, for the future. Otherwise, we're not going to make it.
Yeah, so I was just, some of your comments before reminded me of something that Zadie Smith, the novelist, said, the author of White Teeth, among other books, that she didn't like the idea that you had to be of a certain ethnicity or of a certain gender in order to write about people of that gender. Like a white person couldn't write about African Americans or Chinese people, or and vice versa. Do you have any feelings about that?
That gets in, there's a big debate now with American Dirt, with the non-Chicana who wrote that book, and so there's a lot of problems. This is how I feel. Anybody can write about anything as long as they talk about who they are writing about it. So we're representing.
Yes.
So as long as the point of view, and points of view, by the way, are always subjective. So, I mean, there's nothing wrong with, I believe, a man writing about a woman or a woman writing about a man, as long as the subjectivity of the point of view is clear, all right? That you're not speaking for, but you're speaking about. This gets into a very large debate. I mean, even people say, oh, you represent American Indians. Well, if you talk to my cousins right here in the room, they'll tell you half of what I say is crap. It's all subjective.
Yeah.
So, it's me who's representing in a certain way. I'm one voice. What we need is a chorus. We need, the cacophony of many voices. But we have to remember who we are talking. But if we keep saying who gets to do this and who doesn't get to do this, we keep a polarized kind of dialogue, a kind of polarization between us that is ultimately dangerous and not productive.
So I was in the audience at Santa Rosa Junior College in Petaluma. You were speaking, and somebody in the audience got up and said, Greg, can you please tell us what Indians think about logging today? And I believe you said, well, I can't speak for all Indians. The same point you're making here, that people in your own tribe, there's disagreements, and all Indians don't think alike.
Surprise, surprise. Do all Jews think alike? I always say and I guess us Indian people know this, you put two Indians on an island or in the redwood forest, we're going to argue about something, if you really know us. Then we'll joke, then we'll get mad, then we'll beat each other up, and then we'll be friends, and then we'll be, we're just like everybody else, where our opinions are diverse in the way we approach that. I always say, people come up to me and they say, what do Indians think? The one I love is, are you into nature? Well, folks, if you're breathing, you're into nature.
Yeah, so I remember, I hear what you're saying about the author making it clear who he or she or they is, not pulling the wool over people's eyes. I remember years ago I knew and wrote about a man who called himself Danny Santiago, and he wrote a book called Famous All Over Town.
Oh, yeah.
And it turned out, he gave the impression that he was Chicano. And then it turned out his real name was Dan James, and he came from a wealthy family in Kansas City, and a lot of people felt that they'd been ripped off.
Yeah, and again, I don't know about, again, the question comes up about the representation and those sorts of things, how that works. But, in my case, my mother was Jewish and my father was Filipino and American Indian, and I was adopted and raised Catholic. Who am I to represent? So I got a name Sarris, which is Greek, but I was born Hartman, which is German Jew. Kind of crazy. But what we know, and Mabel McKay said this to me, the person who's had the greatest influence in my life, when I was 18 and I found out I wasn't Mexican, well, some Mexican, but American Indian, I was all excited and I showed the picture of my dad to her, and she just said, "Oh, he's cute." And then I expected her to say, "Oh, welcome to the tribe," all this sort of thing. And then she said, "You'll never be anything other than your experience, what you've been and who you've been. Your experience is what you are." So as a writer, as a thinker, as a leader, I am that person. In a way, to some extent, an orphan. And had an outside perspective. I'll never be, although I spent a lot of time on the Kashaya Reservation as a young man, not going to spiritual things, going to other things up there. But I didn't grow up wasn't born and raised in an American Indian family. I was in a sort of middle-class white family.
So I identified early on as an orphan. I had parents, I had a mother and father, I had aunts and uncles, but somehow or other I didn't want to have a family. And I started to act as though I didn't have a family, that I was an orphan. Like I wouldn't go home for like Christmas and July 4th and things like that. So people started to think that I actually was an orphan, and to take me into their homes, and it's kind of got out of hand.
It kind of worked the reverse for me.
Yes.
Because once I connected with my American Indian family, it turns out, of course, that my great-great-grandfather had 42 children. So I'm like related to almost every Indian in Sonoma County. And now even if I want to play orphan or anonymous, it's hi cousin. Of course, the other way that works is as chairman of the tribe, every time I do something everyone likes, I'm their cousin. And then when I do something they don't like, I'm white. So, I get to be an orphan and I get to be Indian depending on what I do. But
everybody in the tribe always likes what you do and what you say.
Oh, not always. You've got some in here, they'll tell you. I'm not Saddam Sarris. We are a democratic body. Vice Chair Laurel Ross is here. She can testify that we've had, I'll say, healthy disagreements about things. And discussions about things, but the most important thing, that as a tribe and as a tribe that sees itself as a family, the great success we've had and that all families should have is, despite differences, we remember the most important thing is to work it out, to hang together.
So I'm wondering whether there's some things that happen at tribal meetings that there's an agreement that they don't get talked about in public. Is that the case or not?
Well, of course.
It's a dirty laundry.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, and family stories. I mean, I just told you about my great-great-grandfather. Imagine that story. He was a medicine man, and the story goes that he misused his love medicine, and as a consequence, we're all cursed with sex wildness. I say it's a good excuse, but
So, you mentioned Mabel McCabe. I do have this impression, I know from reading your books, and I've probably also been talking to you, that it's not just Mabel, but some of the most important human connections in your life have been with older Native American women. Is that a too broad generalization?
Jonah, I am absolutely right. It was Mabel McKay, who I knew very well, and who told me something really important. But for her, she told me something when I was 19, and having lots of problems. You know, I was not going to be a professor. I didn't go to 8th and 9th and 10th grade, basically. I was in juvenile hall and, you know, beating up people and doing things like that.
Really?
Oh yeah, I was not a nice
Kay
person.
LeBaron always tells me you exaggerate your bad boy history.
And where was she? There's people in this room will tell you some of the awful things I've done. Yeah, like Gay is really connected with the Indian community. I see her up at the Res or at our meetings all the time, hanging out in the car drinking beer. But anyway, I think Mabel McKay said something to me. She said, with all that's happened to you, you have two choices in this life. She said, you can let hate and poison and those things fill your heart. You can poison and hate yourself and poison and hate other people, or you can turn it to medicine or doctrine. And she said, you've already got hate. That's easy. Try the other. Then I had it as an example, Mrs. Parrish, Essie Parrish.
Yeah.
Here is a woman who had 15 children. She led all the ceremonies up at Kashaya, was the political leader. She, like Mabel, worked 40 hours a week in an apple cannery. They did wove baskets that are in the Smithsonian. They traveled 200 miles a night to doctor the sick, Sacramento and other places, got back to the apple canneries on time, and I thought, oh my God, Essie Parrish, who had a second grade education, could play 7 musical instruments. And I used to say to her, Auntie, how can you do this? And I'll never forget this. She looked at me like I was a fool, and she said, ain't no such a word as can't.
So yeah, you did learn a lot of wonderful life lessons from being around these people.
They were examples, and especially examples when they couldn't where they were even afraid to go get gas at a certain gas station, where they had to sit in the back of a movie theater, when all these things were against them here in Santa Rosa and Sonoma County, the prejudice here. To think that they were able to rise despite that.
Yes,
you
right.
know, and I saw that against all odds, the great things they were able to do. I have no excuse. When you see that, what kind of excuse do you have?
So how did you want to go to college and want to go to Stanford and want to be a writer? How did that come about? I don't think I ever asked you that. Was that?
No, I wanted to be rich. This is what happened. And then I found out how stupid that was. But what happened was, when I got a car, Jonah, and this is be in my 10th grade. I got a car before summer. And you know, cars don't run on hallelujahs alone. And you have to get a job. So I got a job. Some of you may be old enough to remember Cattleman's in Montgomery Village was Saddle and Sirloin before it was Cattleman's. Some of you are nodding your head. Okay, so thank God I'm not the oldest person here. I got a job as a busboy. And the busboy job in the summer was split shift. So you would work 3 hours, I think, or 4 at noon, and then come back and work another 4 at night. I was the only busboy in that restaurant with 8 really mean waitresses that are telling me pick up this and pick up that. And what that job did, Jonah, first of all, is it separated me from the kids on the street that I was hanging with. And then, because I didn't have time to hang anymore. And then I saw my friends' parents working as dishwashers and banquet waitresses, and it occurred to me that would be the end of the road for me. I thought, wow, this is it. And I didn't like doing dishes, but I certainly wasn't going to pick up crap for a bunch of waitresses the rest of my life. I didn't want to. So when I went back to 11th grade at Santa Rosa High School, I had all remedial classes. You know, basic math, basic English, you know, like 7 study halls or whatever you could get away with, and gym. And I started studying. But in my mind, I was going to be a businessman and be rich. And you know, studying for a lot of us is the hardest thing. To sit alone with a light bulb when all you've had in your life is your friends who remind you that you're alive. To sit alone with a light bulb and read things and feel that you're already behind the 8 ball, that was so hard. But I did it. And what happened, by being alone for so long, I started reading stories. And literature and reading stories reminded me of what I heard on the streets. Stories. I fell in love with stories, and I fell in love with literature. And then I thought, no, teachers have got me this far. I like reading and writing. I'm going to go and become a teacher and hopefully give back to young folks like myself.
So
That's the story.
when we talked about 15 years ago, one of the things that you said that you would like nothing better than to stay home and read and write, but that it's a kind of luxury to be able to do that. In the world that we're in, you can't do that.
Jonah, thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to be like Louise Erdrich and some of these other writers who stay home and write and then go out and tour their books. I can't do that. I would love that. I love that. Nothing made me happier than studying for my orals at Stanford, having to memorize basically 400 books. But if you have the opportunity, particularly today, to help people, to help your people. My people were illegally terminated. We had no rights, no anything. We weren't even technically Indians. We were poor, we had nothing. And if you have that opportunity, and if you have the opportunity to have a business that can help Indian and non-Indian alike, and give $1 million to the SMART Train and $200,000 to the Secure Family Funds, and help $1 million to fire victims, and you have the opportunity to do this, it is a sin not to do it. You must do it.
So, I heard you mention the SMART Train because I was...
I know you were going to ask. Everybody's asking.
Yes, I was talking to somebody in the tribe an hour ago who said, geez, he didn't consult me about giving $1 million to the SMART Train. I was wondering, why did you give $1 million to the SMART Train?
Because we didn't consult that person. No. So now you can see that. Now you can see the debate that's going to happen when we get to the Laurel. When's the next tribal council meeting? A week from Friday? Yikes! Valentine's Day. Yeah, my Valentine's Day will be a kick in the face from that tribal citizen, I'm sure. No. Why did we do that? Because the tribe's mission is social justice and environmental stewardship. And I know at the time when we were the tribal council, all of us were saying those things when all the debate was going on about the casino, I realized, and that's why I hold no grudges, because I understand that social justice and environmental stewardship and a casino sound antithetical. I'm glad that we've lived long enough to show that we are the economic engine that has given more money than the combined history of people who've donated those things in Sonoma County. Just in the last 6 years, $20 million to environmental stewardship and social justice. But you know, that said, the only thing Indian people have, that is those of us who've come from recognized tribes, is our sovereignty. And the sovereignty is our right to do whatever we want, mostly. We can't go around killing people. But this tribe has, and has had from the beginning, a moral conscience that we wanted to act on and continue to act on, so that politicians and others in this county don't have to take money from the vineyards and other places, even when they say, oh, we're environmentalists in this, but that's the only place they can get money. Now they can come to us and they don't have to compromise their purported values.
Right. I'm glad you said that about the wineries and the vineyards that have been using toxic chemicals, and thank you very much, in the vineyards. High rate of cancer in this county.
A high rate of cancer, and the water is polluted, and those of us, many of the organizations that want to help the water situation here, they take money from the big vineyards, but it's ironic. How can you take money from the people that are causing the problem that you want to fix? It's like having a fire engine on fire. It's crazy. So Grayton's here. We're here.
Well, I write for a magazine that's called Valley of the Moon, and I've written, or tried to write some things that always say, look critically at vineyards and wineries, and the editor and publisher says, well, why would you want to kill the goose with the golden egg? You know, that's the point.
The goose with the golden eggs, because yes, they are the ones that advertise in the magazine, and how you're going to keep that going. Yes. So,
would you please buy Valley of the Moon magazine?
well, Jonah, now you're getting, people always say, what's the tribe going to do with all its money and all these things that are going on? And I said, well, it's simple. They think it's a complicated plan. I said, no, it's really simple. We're just going to buy back Sonoma County.
So I remember the controversy about the resort and the casino.
So do I.
And I would talk to you, it seemed like frequently, during that time when people were writing letters to the Press Democrat, and you would point out, these people wouldn't object to any other ethnic group doing anything else, but as soon as the Indians wanted to do something, then they were up in arms.
Well, yes. Again, there's two stereotypes that Indians have been, I'll say, victims of throughout history. We're the poor fallen nature god when we're defeated, okay? They love to have us in museums weaving baskets and doing art, and oh, look at, we killed their nature for them, and the poor things are on reservations. Isn't it sad? And we love those Indians, and go feed them an orange at Christmas time, do whatever you want. Then the flip side of that is the minute it becomes a question of power or territory, we're wagon burners again. So when I was doing all the books and the movies, remember Bohemian? Sonoma County's native son, Greg Sarris. I come back and I do a casino, the devil. Is he even really Indian? Oh, he's a Jew from Los Angeles trying to make money. Oh my God.
Yes, so I'm a very thin, I think of myself as a very thin-skinned person. And so if somebody says something a little bit maybe off, and I take it personally. You haven't taken these things personally. You wouldn't be here now if you did. Is that the case?
Well, it hurt. It hurt especially growing up in Sonoma County, where I saw the racism, where I saw so much is going on, and to see it ignited in the way it was again. Bumper stickers in Sonoma and in the windows that said, "Not here, Tonto." And mail to us that said the only good Indian is a dead Indian. And, money on Sarris's head and all this kind of stuff. So there was a little fear. But again, the tribal family came together. And when I think about what our ancestors went through to get us here, that wasn't really a big deal. I can take that. Let me just tell you, the Federated Indians of Great Rancheria are comprised of Southern Pomo nations and Coast Miwok nations. At the time of contact, folks, there were approximately 20,000 of us here in different nations. Today we have about 1,452 enrolled members. All of us, our 1,452 people, trace our ancestry back to one of 14 survivors, all of whom were women, all of whom were concubines or wives of early the Mexicans or early Americans. What's that story? That's where you're living. All right, so I think of that. I think of my grandmother as a maid, cleaning toilets, working the fields. I think of those things, and it's easy. It would have been easy for so many, Jonah, of those 14 women to jump off a bridge. And instead, they endured and survived and compromised so that I and the rest of my tribal family is here. We owe them this survival.
So I heard about the casino. I knew about it. I heard to follow the brouhaha and talk with you, and then it was built, and there it was close to my neighborhood, and I drove by it, and then one day I called you up and said, could you give me a guided tour? And which you did. And we were walking around and I accidentally fell into the hot tub.
I was telling that story. Jonah,
Oh my gosh.
folks, I have given probably 1,000 tours. And I have given tours where I have probably had 300 people and we walk around the spa. And I'm giving Jonah a tour because I think he was interviewing me for something. And I'm taking him through the spa and the jacuzzi area. And I wanted to show him our ice shower where the ice comes down and all that. Well, I turn around and, well, I heard this plump. And I turn around and it was angelic. You just went down, but then I saw him sinking in the hot tub just like this. Bubbles coming out of his mouth. And I looked at Albert, my security guy, and we looked at each other and I said, Albert, do something. I think he might not come up. And what does Jonah say the first thing? I'm sorry. Sorry for what? You just nearly killed yourself. And I said, are you okay? And he goes, yeah, I'm just wet.
Well, so I did probably what anybody would have done. I took off my wet clothes and gave them to somebody from the hotel who dried them in the dryer and gave me a white bathrobe from the hotel. So I liked it walking around the casino in this white bathrobe.
And no underwear. You're the first one to have done that. We generally don't do that in the casino, folks, just so you know. But yes, hospitality, we're known for it. Good, Jonah. So we thought we would accommodate you, and he wanted a tour, and it was the beginning of the tour. So yes, I said, we'll be efficient. While your clothes are drying, we can continue the tour. So not only did we give a tour of everything through the high limit room, and these high limit Asian players are in there seeing this guy walk around in a robe and slippers. Interesting over there. And then we went in the team dining room and had dinner with all the team members that are working, and there was Jonah in his robe, and I think by the end somebody came and said, the clothes are dry.
So yeah, around 10 o'clock that night, you turned to me and said, are you hungry? And I said, yes, of course I'm hungry. So you took me to the dining room where I think that there was Indian, Chinese, French, Italian, American food. I mean, just incredible variety of food, and then delicious food, incredibly good food.
Yes, dignity in the workplace. We have about 2,000 people that work for us that 20 hours or more a week. Everybody that works for us gets the Kaiser Gold Cadillac plan. They pay nothing out of their paycheck for full coverage. $10 deductible for aspirin or brain surgery. Plus we have a 450-seat team dining room where you can eat all you want. We do have a buffet that has generally a health area, a health part section, American section, Asian section, plus a salad bar, all kinds of food. We take good care of people. And our next step, since you asked me, and then we should get back to the book, I think. I'm doing my PR for the casino. That's another gig. We have an organic garden that we've started, and our goal is to extend the organic garden so that we produce enough food, organic produce for our elders. But the goal is now to produce all organic produce that will go into the team dining room, into the salads and the vegetables for all our team members that they eat.
Great. How a Mountain was made and Grand Avenue seemed to me like somebody with two different brains. Somebody who's like, shall we say, rooted in the past and hearing the stories that the environment tells, and then somebody who is very much part of the present day world. Is that an accurate read or not?
Well, yeah, but I mean, even in Grand Avenue, a lot of those stories go back and use the myths in the present day. I mean, Indian people, having been here, we're really aware, and we have incredible memories. I tell my aunt that she doesn't forgive anything from 70 years ago, but we have incredible memories, and so we know stories about each other's families, and we know genealogies. When you sit in our houses, we'll say, oh, that's my grandmother's brother's sister's husband's sister-in-law. And people are going, what? But we know, because we know who's related to whom. I mean, you kind of have to, especially if you want to marry an Indian around here. In Grand Avenue, there was an awareness of a past, and the landscape, just as it is in How a Mountain Was Made, the landscape was our sacred text. It was our Bible. So that an outcropping of rocks, a spring, a grove of redwood trees, all of those things had spirits and had stories associated with them, and that's how we knew who we were. So just as the landscape was decimated, so was our sacred text. But we do miraculously have slivers of that still, and we can build upon that with all the news stories that are here.
So, some years ago, you gave me some of your manuscripts to read. And I remember one of them, I suggested that you change the beginning of the story. And I think you thought that I was trying to make your material more commercial. Maybe not, but that's an older woman who's on her deathbed. No, is that?
Yeah, she's actually not older. She's kind of middle-aged, dying of cancer. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but is that something that you do think about? Of not changing your work so that it meets some of the standards of the commercial marketplace?
I think about character. I think what's true about the human being I'm writing about. How do I get into his or her, their head? How do I tell the story as they're living it? And if I can't get the voice or get into the character's head, commercial or not, it's not going to work. It has to be real. And so for me, I mean, there's things that my editors and all stuff always, and my friends who read my material, always say cut and do this or do that. And that makes sense normally. But not every story has to be Twitter accessible. Okay? So we have to again think of texture, of characters. What's the value of reading fiction? Empathy. Empathy for other human beings, learning empathy, and that kind of thing. That's the value of fiction. And if you take that away from fiction, if you take the empathy or character away, you're succumbing to what's plaguing so much of the world today: simple, polarized, black and white thought. As people, and if you can catch people and understand people, we don't think black and white. We don't live black and white, even though we think we do sometimes. We're complicated.
Yeah.
And talk about that complication. That's what makes us human.
So I've known some editors and publishers in the Bay Area, Northern California, who've urged their writers not to have any years or dates in their books and not to say where they're taking place, because they want them to be sort of universal and not have a reader saying, oh, I'm not going to read something that took place in 2009. Or have you encouraged that at all?
No, that's completely ridiculous. Even the notion is polarizing and all of that. Because, Jonah, I believe that in the particular you can see the universal.
Yeah.
So if you see a person that's really real in a novel, you can see the universal there. If the person is struggling with insecurity and the person has 3 heads, you can identify with that. That's a universal kind of thing. Insecurity, jealousy, those human emotions, those are real things. And again, it's hard to, locate something, and I don't know whatever editors those are, but keep them away from me.
So the first time that I interviewed you was on the phone when you were living in Southern California and teaching maybe at Loyola?
Or UCLA, I think.
UCLA, okay. And you answered the phone. I had your number, and you answered the phone, and you said, oh, somebody calling from area code 707. I'm going to be talking to people in my hometown, and, do you think that really made a difference, that it was
That I answered the phone?
With the 707 thing, rather than, would you talk to somebody in 213?
Absolutely not. No, I mean,
Would you talk to somebody in 213 differently than 707 or 212 or, you know?
well, if it's
audience?
707, I always thought in those days that it was my family, and now what? But, yeah, you know, no, those were pretty heady days. You know, Grand Avenue got a lot of attention. I had movie deals and, you know, all things, it was kind of exciting, and all of that. But you know, it enabled me to do a lot and help the tribe in the ways I have. But yeah, it was a different world down there. In some ways, I certainly miss it. I don't miss the traffic. But this is home, and even when I was living there, I wrote about this place. I believe that what happens to you, particularly in your early years, and the psychiatrists, psychologists are telling us this now, what happens to you and how you, in your first 10, 15 years, is basically most of the stuff that you remember and carry with you most of your life. They find that if you do research in people's brains and play music, they react differently to music that they heard when they were 12 and 13 years old versus before or after. Again, around that time of puberty, when you're forming as a human being, that's what you kind of hang on to.
All right. So are you ready to, we'll open this for questions and comments from the audience, or is there anything you want to say before we do that? Leap into that?
No, this is great.